everybody. Hey, I'm Jack Gahn with Remax Choice Properties, and I'll be your host for today. Thanks to everyone for joining this session on the pandemic on real estate and economic outlook. Please let us know in the chat where you're streaming live from today so that we get a sense of where our realtors are in this pandemic world. This session is sponsored by Hamadi.com, and we're going to hear a quick word from our sponsor before I introduce today's guests.
There's a great deal of disruption in the real estate industry, with more than 46 million millennials entering the home buying market over the next decade. This disruption is creating opportunity. These buyers will demand new technology that we can help you deliver. We are committed to visually capturing homes using the most cutting-edge technology, presenting these homes ethically and accurately while promoting their most appealing attributes. We promise to do this at an affordable price. Let us join your team by going to Hamadi.com and enrolling as a featured agent today.
Again, thank you to Hamadi.com for sponsoring this morning's session. Today we'll have time for a Q&A after each panelist section, so please use the chat to ask your questions. I'd now like to introduce our speakers for today's session. We have special guests from the National Association of Realtors, Chief Economist, Senior VP of Research, Lawrence Yoon, and VP of Demographics Behavioral Insights, Dr. Jessica Louts. Lawrence and Jessica, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jack, for inviting.
And from now, I'll let you take it over, Lawrence, and kick it off.
Great. So you are in for a treat as my colleague, Dr. Louts, who study all the millennials and other demographics. So you have to wait on the second half on the home buyer trend. But thanks for inviting because Nashville market is one of the hottest market, not only in the post-pandemic, or I'm not sure what the phrasing is. After the lockdown, when the economy reopened, Nashville simply boomed. But as you know, it was booming even before the pandemic for several years. You know, it was in 2019, 2018, 2017. In fact, when I speak with people out in the coastal areas, for better or worse, when I speak with people from Boston or people from California, they say, would you consider living in middle part of America? And they say, well, I'm not so sure other than few cities. I would consider Austin as possibility and Nashville. So that's how they speak from the coastal areas. And I think this is the reason why you are seeing such a rapid increase in prices, because from Tennessee perspective, home prices used to be very affordable, but now very, very high. But from people who are coming from the coast into Tennessee, they're essentially saying these are still bargains and they don't mind bidding up the prices further. And that is part of the attraction. I guess very good news for homeowners in the local area. Definitely good for the housing industry, but a major challenge for longtime residents of Nashville who would like to purchase because they are getting essentially outbid by many new residents coming into the market. So where do we go from here? Because it was certainly a surprise that home buyers completely rushed in once the lockdown period ended, as they were facing record low mortgage rates. But now we are beginning to see some signs of topping out. Let me illustrate this best with PowerPoint slides, because as an economist, I speak better with PowerPoint slides. So let me put that onto the screen. And as I am doing that, I want to give thanks to President Copeland of Nashville Association of Realtors, because he has certainly been a major player at National Association of Realtors, as well as the regional areas where he participates actively to assure that Tennessee is well represented in the national policy discussion related to real estate. So this is the topping out of home sales that we are beginning to see. So what this graph shows is that there is a sort of steady trend in home sales before the pandemic. Then when the pandemic hit, lockdown and sales plunge. Scary time at that period. But once the economy reopened, you see that recovery occurring, but then a surge of activity well beyond the pre-pandemic levels. Home sales were running about 25% above 1 year ago, but the latest data is still showing above 1 year, above pre-pandemic conditions, but not as 20% or 25%. It is showing only 5% increase or 10% increases in most markets. So some degree of topping out condition for existing home sales. New home sales in the meantime is still holding on. You can see that it went way above pre-pandemic levels and staying above that. So the builders, whatever they are building, they're able to find buyers. Another builders are facing challenges on the material costs, lumber prices particularly, and also trying to find skilled construction workers. But whatever pricing they put onto it, or escalation clause to account for uncertainty in lumber prices, people still want to buy. So the builders are having no problem selling homes, and you can see many of the publicly listed home builders, I mean, their stock prices keep rising, and they're saying good revenue conditions, great number of potential buyers still lined up at the door. The reason for home sales topping out, from my point of view, is not because somehow the buyers are retreating. We know that home prices are high. Some buyers are simply unable to afford at these high prices. But it is the record low inventory that is hindering even further growth in home sales. Just visualize, hypothetical experiment. If you had 20% more inventory in your market, would you have 20% more home sales? And I would say most of you would say, yes, I would easily have 20% more home sales if we had more inventory. So this is the constraining factor as to why home sales are not clicking as strongly as before. Just simply record low inventory. Also, this graph can also be used for some potential buyers who are beginning to raise a very valid question. Are we in a housing market bubble? Should we anticipate some price correction? Just show this graph to say that back in 2006, 2007, when those bad mortgages, subprime lending blew up, we had an oversupply. But look at the supply situation today, record low. In this condition, prices do not decline. And furthermore, good thing we don't have those risky mortgages in the marketplace. Today, nearly all home buyers are taking out that 30-year fixed rate mortgage. And furthermore, they have to show documentation and they have to stay well within budget to receive the mortgage. So we are in a record low inventory. Very valid question about housing market bubble, but this chart is showing no, we are not in anywhere near any home price decline potential. One other interesting development because of the record low inventory is that if we overlay that chart with NAR membership, realtor members, orange line, this is the first time where we are seeing there are more members than inventory nationwide, which will be essentially also, I would assume, similar in the greater Nashville area, where you have actually more members than the number of listings. Now, it's an interesting media story, but from realtors, it's really about income generation. So the home sales are still moving. It's not only about listings, home sales are still moving, but it's simply that the listings are not staying in the market for a long period. It gets listed, after a couple of weeks or a couple of days in some cases, it's taken off the market. So inventories are not showing up, even though incomes are being generated and they're happy home buyers with a new set of key to get in to the wealth building condition that the home ownership provide. Also, because the inventory levels are very, very low, we're seeing a dynamic where number of new existing inventory to newly constructed home inventory. So you can say that MLS versus the home builders. How is the ratio? Well, historically, the ratio should be about 6 or 7. During the financial market crisis, you see a blow up in the inventory condition. But right now, we are only seeing about 3-to-1 ratio which means that home builders actually have inventory where they're beginning to say, do we need realtors or not in order to get the deals done? Now, I know the builders sometimes can be fickle. They want realtor help at certain times. Other times they don't need realtors help. So that's I think, a poor long-term judgment. They should be consistent in how they deal with it. But today it is at the condition where, from the buyer's perspective, some buyers are not only looking at the multiple listing service, but they're actually contacting home builders on their own to see what's available. But this is, again, due to the lack of inventory. And even though the builders may not be so cooperative today, let's keep in mind, when the builders build at home, it's often for trade-up buyers. So a trade-up buyers buy a newly constructed home, and in the process, they release their existing home into the MLS. So you would get more inventory that way. Some trickle-down effect of the building leading to more inventory in the MLS. Also, if we look at the inventory situation, inventory is extremely tight at the lower price point. So for first-time buyers, very difficult. Lack of inventory, hard to buy. And if there is an inventory, the buyer has to face other 20 or so potential competitors. How do you put in the escalation clause? Given the escalation clause, how will the appraisals come in? Or does the cash buyers have a tremendous advantage in the current market condition? Only in the very upper end market, the inventories are adequately there. So on the $1 million plus, there is actually more listing today compared to 1 year ago. If we look at the home sales activity, where the home sales are moving, we see a sort of similar trend line, where on a $1 million plus, home sales are 80% above 1 year ago. So say greater Nashville area, there was $100 million home sales last year. Well, this year it could be 80% growth. And you see where the growth is occurring and where the growth is not occurring. It's not occurring in the starter home market. And given the increases in land prices, it will be almost impossible to find home at under $100,000, or those days are completely over in essence. So Nashville home prices, as you see, moving up. 2010, you look at the price, $150,000. That was the median price. And you say, well, I should have bought 3, 4, 5 property back then, because prices have essentially doubled from that time period, just a medium priced home. So, quite an achievement in terms of the growth in the home prices. If we look at also this chart, which shows number of home sales that is sold above list price. Tennessee, 36% of the homes that were recently sold are being sold above list price, meaning that multiple offers are prevalent, price escalation clause. So a very unusual, very hot market with so many buyers, not enough inventory. So the builders, what are the builders doing? Today, you will see in some financial news that the builders pull back on production. And the blue line is the single-family housing starts. So it shows that in month of April, it is less strong compared to the prior month. But if you take the average, average of the first 4 months versus 1 year ago, it is still up. Compared with 2019, it is still up. 2018, it is up. In fact, this year will be the highest home building activity in 15 years. So despite the month-to-month volatility, this year builders will be putting up more homes, which means more inventory. The red bar is the multifamily, primarily apartments. I know that in downtown Nashville, there's some condominium, high quality condominiums being built. But today's market is principally apartments, and then it is essentially moving flat, not really rising nor declining. If we look at also the housing start from long time ago, from 1960, what you observe is that in some years it is above average, other years it is below. But when it goes above or below, it quickly returns back to average. But look what has happened from 2007 to last year. 14 straight years of underproduction. The cumulative effect of 14 years of underproduction is we are facing housing shortage. So your client asks, why come we don't have inventory? Well, one reason is the cumulative effect of multiple years of underproduction. We simply don't have enough home. But in 2021, we will go above average, and 2022, even higher. That is my forecast because based on the trend that I see, housing permit, how the builders are feeling in terms of confidence level, all that is pointing that now we are finally going to break above historical average, and that is a good news about the inventory potential. In the absolute number, these are the top markets with most home building in the past 12 months. Houston, Dallas, actively building because people are moving in. Phoenix, active. Atlanta. And then you would look down the line, you see Nashville towards the end, but these are essentially the top 10 markets. So Nashville is in essence top 10 with about 15,000 new single family housing starts that's occurring in your local market, which means over a 12-month period, 15,000 additional inventory that should be reaching the marketplace. Some home builders will put it on MLS, other home builders will not. But this is additional inventory that is coming into the Nashville market. One concern about the housing demand, because housing supply at least is moving in the right direction. Housing demand is mortgage rates are beginning to rise. It was 2.7% at Christmas last year, and even January, February, it was under 3%. But now it is going above 3%. First is just step back and say 3.1% mortgage rate average. That's not bad at all. I mean, this is how people should be thinking. People who got 2.7%, congratulations. You got the absolute low, you timed it right. But still 3.1% is not that bad. Nonetheless, some people will begin to feel the squeeze of higher mortgage rates. That's how the mortgage calculator works. So why is the mortgage rates rising? Well, the Federal Reserve has indicated they will not raise interest rates. Well, why is the mortgage rate rising then? Because Federal Reserve does not directly control mortgage rates. What is impacted is the 10-year Treasury yield, which is the blue line. So when the US government borrows money and some investors gets a little nervous, we have to offer higher interest rates. So the US government is offering a little higher interest rate to buy US government debt. All the stimulus that has been taking place, those are not free lunch. It is higher budget deficit, higher national debt, partly financed by printing of the money. And some of the global bond investors are saying, look, I'm getting a little nervous. You better pay me a little higher interest rate or I am not going to buy the US debt. So the blue line is rising, which means that it's going to push up the red line. And the red line is the mortgage rates. So as the blue line continue to increase, red line will probably follow that trend. My forecast is about 3.5% mortgage rate by Christmas time this year. So if you have a client who are wondering, will the mortgage rate go down or not? Maybe in week to week, there will be a little volatility, but the general trend is longer the person wait, more likely they will face higher mortgage rates. Price increases are also a concern because prices are rising way above what is considered a comfort zone. Comfort zone will be under 2%. So now it is rising at 4%. And if we look at where the prices are rising, first, it's not everywhere. In fact, airplane tickets are actually lower today compared to pre-pandemic. Sporting events, a little lower price. Car insurance, because there's far fewer car accidents because there's less driving, especially during the lockdown. It is a little lower. Or if you are seeing a higher car insurance, maybe you want to get a quote from different companies because car insurance average rate is a little lower. Close down. College tuition, maybe because of the online situation over the past 12 months, they have not raised the college tuition like they would normally do. Rents are rising about 1.3%. The moving and storage, as you go into the middle part, 5.3% increase. So some of your clients, they will be getting the moving truck or need a temporary storage space. Just guide them that it's going to be a little more expensive now than before. Beef. So if you're not a vegetarian, you are angry because beef prices are rising 7.1%. That's much higher than people's income growth. Appliances, facing appliance shortage, rising 7.9%. Gasoline, a 5-year high. Realtors drive a lot, so that will certainly hurt their pocketbooks. But let me turn to the yellow highlighted one. Used car prices are rising faster than new car prices. So what that tells me is that there's still a degree of financial stress among most Americans. Because if you feel financially comfortable, you would buy new cars. But right now, there's strong demand for used cars, which is implying there is a degree of financial anxiety among a good sizable number of Americans. Home prices, believe it or not, is not part of the consumer price inflation. So when the government comes out with the data, or you see in the evening news, inflation rate 4%, well, it doesn't include home prices, even though most people care about their home prices. So keep that in mind. And the pipeline inflationary pressure also is building. This is the producer price of construction materials. So you can see what the builders are facing, or even people who are building office spaces, shopping malls, large increase in construction material costs. One thing that inflation is not occurring was on the apartment rents, and that's the blue line. Just ignore the orange line for a second, though. So the apartment rent is still slightly above 1 year ago, but it's been decelerating. Why is it decelerating? Well, because during the pandemic, in the early months, many people lost jobs, especially in the restaurant industry. They're young people, young adults. So when they lost jobs, they went straight to parents' basement. So the total rental demand collapsed during the early months of the pandemic. But note that with jobs recovery, the rental demand is beginning to bounce back. So if you are looking for renters, I think it will steadily reappear. Even apartment vacancy, especially in Nashville, very, very tight before the pandemic. I think it's going to be tight again as the number of the rental households are beginning to build. Jobs recovery means people are coming out of the basement and seeking out their own unit, which also means the following, going back to the prior chart. The rent deceleration will soon end, and it will begin to pick up. And if this picks up, inflation will pick up again. So inflation is already 4%, but it could even go higher based on pipeline inflationary pressure, and also if the rent begins to increase. Let me now turn to the job market and then go into the forecast. So the job market is that month-to-month changes. We lost massive number of jobs during the lockdown, but you see some recovery. Some states are doing better than others. Tennessee is down only 2.7%, so better than national average. Nearby states, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, also down minimally. Northern states are down a little more. Nevada, Las Vegas at one point had 35% unemployment rate. Can you imagine 1/3 of the neighborhood with people without a job? Well, that was the case because people are not traveling to Las Vegas, but now Las Vegas is steadily returning. Only 2 states have more jobs today compared to 1 year before. Idaho and Utah, they have more jobs today compared to 1 year before, but other states down. Tennessee only minimally. I think Tennessee will turn orange in either 2 or 3 months based on the trend. And this is the US job market from year 2000 to recent. So what this shows is that from year 2000, job number matched during the financial crisis in 2010, and job numbers matched during the pandemic, in the early months of the pandemic. So red line as sort of the reference point as to the sort of the minimal points. But I want to highlight with the difference with the Nashville region. Look how far it is up. So this growth way above the red line is implying job growth in the Nashville area is much stronger than the national average. You are getting some technology company to relocate. You have the manufacturer, Nissan expanding. So all this is contributing to the job growth in the local region. And you feel it every day as you are driving along the highways, the traffic jam. The traffic jam is direct result of this faster job creation. Thinking about President Biden's infrastructure spending, certainly Nashville needs it because of the traffic jam encountering situation. Now, the path for home sales in 2021, my forecast is the first quarter numbers are in, is up about 12%. Second quarter will be massive, but this is an artificial comparison because we are comparing with a lockdown period in 2020. Third quarter, no change from third quarter of the year before. And by fourth quarter, I actually believe the sales will be down about 10% from the surge of activity fourth quarter last year because of higher mortgage rates. But if you assume that this is a reasonable projection, what you are going to get in 2021 is annual total home sales will be up 10% from the year before. So in terms of the overall business, closing, income, the number of home sales, it will be up 10% from 1 year before. And let me, for the sake of time, just move on to the forecast. So 2021, solid economic expansion, GDP rising 4.5%. Job growth is coming, but not fully. So at least for the country, Nashville will be fully recovered in 2 or 3 months, but nationwide not fully recovered. The 10-year Treasury yields are rising because of rising budget deficit, and inflation is picking up. Maybe I need to upgrade that forecast because inflation is already at 4%, but let's see how it moves for the remainder of the year. And the housing market forecast is simply that the mortgage rate will steadily rise. Builders build it. 20% increase in home sales. Existing home sales, I went through the logic as to why it would be 10% higher, and home prices in no danger of a decline. I know people are beginning to Google search housing market bubble, when will home prices decline? Well, it's not going to decline given the housing shortage. So overall industry revenue will be up about 17%. So just for sake of time, thank you for inviting and thanks for listening. And now I'm going to stop sharing and get it back to Jack.
Lawrence, per usual, thank you so much. That was very informative, and always you do such a great job in explaining it to us, some of us who aren't economists. We do have a couple questions from the audience, so I'm going to ask you one. The first one is, how many homes should the Nashville market be building per year to maintain a healthy inventory?
That question I cannot answer because I did not look at the detail, long-term detail. I was looking at the national numbers, but my guess is that Nashville is more active, as you saw. So maybe it is rising compared to above historical average, but you also have to account for the fact you have so many new residents. I mean, people have discovered Nashville and saying, we want to go to Nashville. So you have that extra population growth occurring from new residents.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely feel the new residents coming in. And then the second question is, does a huge increase in those people moving to Middle Tennessee have an impact on the public education system, on the public schools?
If there are families with school-age kids, I mean, certainly there's a demand for public schooling. And therefore, again, added pressure, the property taxes generally funds a good portion of the local schools. So home values, that is providing the revenue source. But I don't know how everything works out because sometimes they say they need to impose impact fee on the home builders to account for schooling budget. But if the impact fees are too high, then it makes building more difficult because we need more inventory.
Makes perfect sense. Another question for you is, at what interest rate will buyers begin to back off from making new purchases? Or do we know what that interest rate would look like in order for that to happen?
So we did some scenario analysis. So from the overall market, if the mortgage rate was to rise to 4%, I mean, it's going to see a meaningful decline in home sales. I would say even about 15% or 20% lower compared to what it had been if the mortgage rate reaches 4%. But everything is incremental. So even if the mortgage rate rise, just a decimal point, there are some people on the margin who just qualified last week, but now this week they cannot qualify because of that. It messed up their ratios. So people who barely qualified last week will not be able to qualify now. So it's always incremental, but overall market condition is that if the mortgage rate was to go up to 4%, there will be meaningful decline of about 15 to 20% decline in home sales, not home prices.
Right.
When the home sales decline, inventory begins to build up and the prices begin to normalize.
All right, one final question for you. To your knowledge, is there a place or a market in the United States that's not experiencing big price increases at this time?
Well, I received a question from the reporter recently to say, tell us which market is hot and which is not. And my answer to that was, just about every market in America is hot. But if we were to pinpoint where it's not, it would be some industrial town, say like Youngstown, Ohio, where factory shuts down. I think the median home price there is about 110,000 as people are leaving to find better jobs. So you will be some few isolated conditions like that. But right now we are seeing about 99% of the metro market across the country seeing price increases, and more than half seeing double-digit price increases. So this is a nationwide housing market lift that we are experiencing.
Wow, that is great for, I guess, just about everybody. Well, Lawrence, thank you so much again for spending some time with us and always giving us the best information we can get in order to educate our clients going forward. For everyone that's watching, the slides will be available after the webinar today. So again, Lawrence, thank you for that, and thank you for all your information. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Lautz, who is the VP of Demographics Behavioral Insights for NAR.
There we are. Sorry about that. Only 14 months into the pandemic, and I'm learning to unmute, so that's good. Thank you guys so much for having me today. Hearing Lawrence speak is always just an amazing treat, and so it's very, very hard to follow him. I just want to say thank you to Brian Copeland, too, for having us here. I just think this is a great opportunity. Nashville is an incredibly hot market, and I know everyone is really feeling the growth there in the population. And I love the school age kids question because I think it's a really fascinating change. So I'm trying to share my screen and it's not popping up to actually share my PowerPoint, which is strange, but that's okay. We'll keep playing around with it. It's a really interesting market there in Nashville. And I think it's you guys are really feeling that as well. I'm going to be talking about some of the demographics that we are seeing change in the country right now and the unequal recovery that we are seeing. So there's been a lot of talk about that K-shaped recovery and how some people are really bouncing back and the jobs are back and we're really seeing that. But unfortunately, that change is not for everyone right now, as we do see there's some hesitation in coming back to the workplace right now, and whether that's thank you, Emily. I would love if you share my PowerPoint. I think that would be great. For some reason, it's not popping up there. It has really been an unequal playing field for some folks as they've needed to go home, as Lawrence said, to their parents' basements. In many cases, we actually have the largest share of young adults since the Great Depression who are living at home right now. Thank you, Emily. That's amazing. And so we really do see a lot of families doubling up to take care of each other, because there are a lot of people who have not been able to actually recover right now. So Emily, if you want to jump to the next slide, I'm going to talk about some of this unequal recovery and this uneven recovery right now. And to the next one. Thank you. All right, awesome. So one of the things that we've been talking a lot about at NAR is actually looking at the homeownership rate. And when we talk about the K-shaped recovery right now, this is actually influencing the homeownership rate that we do see in the US. And it's influencing the ability to build wealth in the US. But we do see that this is an increasingly large problem. And so when we look at that unequal playing field, what we do see in that K-shaped recovery is that those who have not been able to really recover are more likely to be Black, African American, and more likely to be Hispanic, Latino. And unfortunately, those jobs in the economy right now have not recovered at the same pace. But something that NAR has been looking at for a very long period of time is looking at US Census data and understanding who are the homeowners today and who the homeowners are not. And when we look at the homeownership rate, what we do see is that 73% of white non-Hispanics are actually homeowners today, in comparison to just 42% of Black African Americans. So when we look at that as a nationwide scale, we've actually broken that down on a state level. And there are some states that have have a spread, a gap that's much wider than this 30% that we're seeing today. For instance, in North Dakota, the Black homeownership rate is just 5%. So not to pick on North Dakota, but it is one of the most striking numbers, I think, that we really can look at. A lot of this has to do with housing affordability. A lot of it has to do with the lack of inventory available in the country, but there's a lot of other reasons behind this gap as well. So the jobs factor is certainly a big factor here. But we also know that this is a historical gap and that there are systemic issues behind this as well. So we actually see on this trend line here that we did have an artificial push of Black and Hispanic homebuyers during the boom period. Unfortunately, these individuals were targeted for faulty loan products and then lost their homes at greater rates. What this leads into is not just them personally losing their home, but this also leads into lost family wealth, lost family knowledge of the homeownership process in general. And so that also contributes to this bigger gap. But on the next slide, one of the other things that I think is important to note is among successful homebuyers, those who entered into the buying process, their experiences as well. So we actually recently took a look at these home buyers, and what we found is that for recent home buyers who did purchase in the last year, they had vastly different experiences based on their race. So even among those who entered into the housing market, what we do see is that for Black African American individuals, 10% actually were rejected from their mortgage application in comparison to just 4% of white Caucasians. So looking at that, that's 2.5 times the rejection rate for Black African American buyers who very likely qualified for that home. They did qualify for a home. They very likely did not necessarily have a good reason to be denied from this mortgage application process, though they may have been given one or perhaps just didn't have their call returned in the process as well. The important thing of looking at this data is that we know that these are successful home buyers. We're not even looking at those who were rejected from that home buying process and said, you know what, I don't feel like this is the right thing for me. Maybe I should go back to renting. The inventory is tight anyway. I just don't feel like I can enter. And so those buyers are not people that we're capturing here. And I think that's an important thing to note. The other thing here is that in this data, we were able to parse out some really big differences. One of them that I think has bubbled up to the forefront of late is tapping your 401k for a down payment. That is a way that some first-time homebuyers have to use because they don't have equity from their past home. And what we actually have found is that for Black African American homebuyers, they are very likely to do this. And in fact, 15% of them, 1 in 6, are tapping their 401k to enter the home buying market. And in comparison, we're looking at single digits for other races. And so when you see that, that just leads to that further wealth erosion, unfortunately. And we know that homeownership is the number one way that people do build wealth in this country. But if you're tapping that 401k, it's essentially borrowing from yourself, and that becomes a bigger problem as well. So the last chart that I do want to show you on this is on the next slide. And on that, I do want to just bring home the point here that homeownership really is the number one way that people build a net worth in this country. In fact, when we look at homeowners overall, regardless of race, what we do see is that your typical homeowner has more than $250,000 in net worth compared to your typical renter who just has over $6,000 as an overall family net worth. When we look at this by race, what we can see here for all individuals, regardless of whether they're a homeowner or a renter, is that for white families, you can see that their net worth is above $188,000 compared to Black African Americans who their net worth is just $24,000. And that gap has actually also widened over time, mirroring that homeownership rate gap. And that really is a very, very large problem in the US, and something, unfortunately, the pandemic has just exacerbated with this affordability crisis that we are seeing now. So I want to go into some of the changes that we are seeing on the next slide. One of the things that we are tracking right now is looking at census data. And what we are seeing is that for right now, we know that there's a lot of people who are not able to actually pay their mortgage. And so when we actually look at the mortgage payment status, what we do see is that 18% of Hispanic Latinos who have a mortgage on their property are not actually able to pay that. We also see that that's extremely high for Black African Americans. Hopefully they are taking advantage of forbearance programs that are in effect until the end of June. But if not, CoreLogic has done some really great data on this that does show that these owners actually do have equity in their home. They have the ability to actually sell their home if they needed to, and actually probably move to a smaller home or into a property, temporarily rent, or to live with family for a temporary period of time. And on the next slide, if you want to jump ahead. Sorry, Emily, I am not used to having someone else jump through my slides, so I'm very sorry. I'm a little clunky at this. All right, so the other thing that we're seeing here is the confidence to pay next month's mortgage. And I think that's incredibly important too. We know what is behind us, but what about the confidence for next month? And we see the exact same pattern here as well. So the CoreLogic data that's out there, it does show that these owners do have equity, typically actually more than $75,000 in equity. It's just 4% that are in a situation where they may not have enough equity to be able to sell for a profit. But that is in very select areas of the country. And as Lawrence talked about, this year-over-year home price growth that's been consistent for 109 months at this point has really brought this equity into these individuals' homes for that ability to sell. All right, so let's jump into a different topic. All right, so let's go on. And if you want to skip ahead, I guess 2 slides, there we are. So the home buyers today, during the pandemic, what we do know is they have higher incomes. They're buying at higher price points because home prices have increased so rapidly. And when we look at the home prices that they're actually buying at, we can see that those who are purchasing over that $1 million price point has actually increased more than 100%. And when we look at the incomes of home buyers today, we also know that they are well heeled. These are buyers who can compete in this environment, who can have multiple offers put on a property and in some cases be able to pay all cash for that property as well. The other thing that we know about those home buyers today is that their expected tenure is different than what we have seen historically. We have seen that buyers in the past, when we look pre-Great Recession, so we're looking like a decade ago, what we do see is that buyers, first-time home buyers, were saying, I'm just going to own this home for 5 years. Then I'm going to move on from my entry-level home and move up into a different home. That actually doubled. And we saw that first-time home buyers today are expecting to live in their home for 10 years, repeat buyers 15, 20 years, saying this is my forever home in many cases. A lot of people really putting that investment into their home and saying, this is my home for now. What we're seeing for pandemic buyers is a little different. They needed a home for right now. They didn't necessarily care about a decade down the road or 15 years down the road. They just said, this is my home for right now. That's a very interesting change. Another change that we're seeing is that there is a share of buyers who are purchasing homes sight unseen, or at least putting contracts on them. This is a very big jump and something that I think is very interesting to watch, as we do see that the competition is stiff out there. There's very low inventory and people are moving quickly. So perhaps they know that those contingencies or their back out plans, that they can actually move out of that contract if they needed to, but in some cases could be waiving those as well. That is a very, very interesting dynamic. It also has some big implications for the realtor in that situation, because that realtor is probably someone who they're saying, okay, what does the house actually look like? What does that neighborhood actually look like? If I haven't been to that neighborhood, if I'm moving completely from a different city, what does that mean for me? And that's very, very interesting change, and what we do see moving forward as well. Is this a change that's here to stay, or is this something that was just in the pandemic and is not here to stay? I think that's an interesting question. The other thing that we're absolutely seeing is that people are embracing technology. They're using those virtual tours, those virtual listings. Those were something that really were brought into place early in the pandemic from a safety and social distancing perspective, but they've stayed. And they've stayed because the inventory is low, because people need to be strategic in the homes that they're actually seeing. And they need to make sure that they can quickly filter through the homes that they're seeing online and only see the homes they're very interested in person. All right, so in the next slide, I want to show you some of the demographic changes that we're seeing here as well. So I loved the ad at the very beginning because it talked about this growth in millennials who are coming into the market. They are here. They're absolutely here. They are actually 37% of all buyers today. They are the largest share of home buyers today by generation. We do see millennials are here as a force. A lot of them, for younger millennials, have mom and dad's money. I think that is a very key component. It doesn't matter what generation you are using technology in this process right now. But one key thing that we are seeing from millennials is mom and dad's money is really influencing. And it's not just influencing what home they're buying, it's often influencing the location that they're buying, even the city that they're purchasing in as well. That is a very interesting dynamic. Gen Xers, they are a very small generation. It's someone that's often overlooked as a generation, but I do think that they're an interesting generation. Many of them actually lost homes in the Great Recession. They have bounced back. They are coming back into the housing market. Many of them actually do need to tap their 401k to be able to enter into the buying market. A highest share of those who are tapping their 401k are Gen Xers. This is also the share who is buying multi-generational homes. And I do want to touch on that. So we can jump to the next slide. But I want to say, and the last thing here is that for boomers who are in the market today, they're the most likely generation to be sellers. Why does that matter? Because they're the ones who are holding the generational wealth. They are holding that cash that they do have in their home, this very large amount of equity. And that's causing some generational conflicts because millennials, the largest generation of buyers, well, boomers are the largest generation of sellers holding onto that wealth. And that becomes a very interesting dynamic. All right, so the next slide, looking at multi-generational buyers, this has jumped considerably. We are at 15% of all buyers purchasing a multi-generational home right now, the largest region for aging parents who are living there. This is a very large jump that happened during the pandemic. The survey research that we've done throughout the pandemic shows that this is actually a permanent change, that these older adult relatives have been moved out of nursing homes or independent living, assisted living, perhaps from a COVID perspective, but now they are in that family member's home to stay. That is an interesting change. And that is something that the US is going to have to grapple with moving forward as we look at the aging housing stock that is not well prepared for aging in place. And how does everyone stay safe in that environment as well? These aging parents could have also been moved into that home from a childcare perspective, taking care of children who did not have open schools or daycares and were doing Zoom school. And so those parents, those working parents, needed a little help. The other change that we saw here during the pandemic is that people were actually pooling their money together to actually buy a larger home that they could. So that fallback plan of having other family members there, really, really important during the pandemic and something that could be there to stay if they went and purchased this large single family home together. The other thing that we have seen is adult children living at home, largest share since the Great Depression. Very interesting transition. What happens now? Those jobs are being rehired. Are they out of the house? Are they boomeranging back again, back into college? What's happening here? Are they leaving the nest a second time? I think this is an interesting time right now as we moved into fall and colleges reopen again. This will be an interesting change. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. One of the things that I think is very, very important when we look at home buyers in the US is what I'm showing you here is actually birth rates in the country. So this is overall looking at the entire country. What we have seen is a massive, massive baby bust in the US. Our birth rates in the US are actually down to the lowest point that the US has actually ever recorded in the last decade, or in the last 100 years, century. This is the lowest point in the last century. This is a fascinating trend that we have seen. The pandemic has only exacerbated this trend. There has been countless articles about job losses that women have faced, the pressures on working mothers and working parents, just knowing that they're trying to juggle not only Zoom themselves, but then also Zoom school, closed daycares, and so on. And this has become a very, very big concern. Before the pandemic, this was a financial concern. We very much saw that families had to not make the choice not to have children because they could not afford them, partly due to student loan debt, partly due to later marriage rates. Regardless of the reasons, we do see that there is a massive baby bust that is happening in the country. If we go on to the next slide, I want to show you what this means for home buying. We have seen this mirrored in home buyers. So when we look back to 1985, what we do see is 58% of home buyers did have children in the home under the age of 18, and today it's just 33%. This shift has some big implications for what people need out of that home, how many bedrooms, where that home is located, if schools are influencing that buying decision at all, either now or for resale. That is a big, big question for all of these families. All right, on to the next slide. The other big change that we're seeing is a clearing of the shelters. The cost of a dog went up more than 100% in the last year. The cost of a cat went up more than 40% in the last year. That is influencing where people are buying as well, as we do see these choices, and the pets being that big shift as well. All right, and on to the next one. I want to show you the last demographic change that we are seeing here is really seeing this change in household composition when we do look at marriage rates. So when we look at marriage rates, what we do see is that back in the 1960s, more than 70% of American adults were married, and today just half of American adults are married. This is a huge shift in what people need from a home, because when we look at this, what we do see is that for buyers overall, looking back at the 1980s, 75% of buyers were married, and today just a little over half are married. That means a different type of home. It means more single adults living there, but it also means a shift as we look at the affordability constraints. We see more roommates who are purchasing homes together. We see more unmarried couples who are purchasing homes together, and they may need different things out of their homes as opposed to looking at this married couple. This is an interesting dynamic. We have seen that single females have been really a force in the market. It's 19% of first-time home buyers overall. It has been higher in the past, but affordability is really cutting into that. All right, on the next slide, looking at this by generation, we do see that there are some differences here. For the youngest section, this younger millennials, 20% are unmarried couples. And what we do see is for older generations, we actually see a large share of single females in the market. So very big differences here, but I think it's interesting because usually we're thinking those younger adults could be those single adults, but not necessarily true. All right, next slide. Drop in first-time home buyers. This is a very big impact to the market right now, cutting into that affordability, really struggling to see these first-time home buyers come into the market. Even with these low interest rates, they're not necessarily able to actually take advantage of this. So we are seeing that this really has dropped to more than a 30-year low. Back when we looked at this low time before, what we did have was double-digit interest rates. Right now we have these incredibly low interest rates, and that is cutting into it. And the next slide. Student loan debt, massive issue in the economy right now. We know that this does delay home buyers for at least 7 years to be able to save for that down payment. And we know that this is a problem for these first-time home buyers as well, especially if they don't have family help. It really does cut into who's able to actually purchase a home. And for those with student loan debt, it's not just saving for that down payment and those closing costs. It's also making that monthly payment and qualifying for a mortgage with the debt to income ratio. That becomes a very large issue as well. All right, so I think I'm going to leave the slides there. I will say that there is hope. Agent use incredibly high right now. We do see on both the buyer and the seller side that we have all-time highs for both of these. The agent use is one of the very, very consistent things that we do see. So with all of these demographic changes and all of the economic changes, we do see that the agent use is really the consistent pattern that we have seen in the market today. Buyers do want someone who's going to calm their anxiety, help them find that home, help them negotiate terms. And on the seller side, they want someone to sell within that specific time frame and really find that qualified buyer and really help them through every aspect of that process using a full service agent to be able to do that for them. And that's what we have seen consistently. So thank you, Emily, so much for really saving the day there, sharing my slides. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jessica. That was more than informative. There's so many things, so many quickly. I know most people on this call probably could spend a couple speak on all these different issues, and maybe someday we'll get that opportunity. I do have one question for you, and you kind of just touched on it, and maybe that's a good thing we segued in. Is the widespread use of technology and the uptick in buying homes sight unseen, using those technologies to kind of get your full viewing of the show, is that a threat to traditional real estate model or to, agent use?
So I would say no. Based on the survey research that we've done, we've heard consistently from our members that they think that technology is here to stay. And buyers, we have seen, even for the youngest generations who are the biggest adopters of technology and using these technologies, they're using agents at higher rates than any other generation because they know how important that is. They want the professional on their side who can really help them purchase the biggest financial transaction of their life. And they really do need that agent to do that.
Great. And then kind of a question between the two of you guys is, Lawrence touched on how the rising home prices are continuing throughout the year, probably for foreseeable future, especially in a market like Nashville. And then you touched on our first-time home buyers having a harder time getting into the market. Do we see that gap going to be widening over the next couple of years, or the time it takes, because prices are going to continue to increase, but you still have like the student debt issues and all these other issues that we deal with?
Yeah, that's a big question. So we have seen these first-time home buyers under the historical norm for the last decade, essentially from the Great Recession. The headwinds that they have are not necessarily going away. And one of those is student loan debt. We need more inventory. We need affordable inventory. We need inventory that folks can move on to their second or their next home. And that's something we don't have right now. So if we had some inventory come into the market, that could help quite a bit for your first-time home buyers.
Okay. And this question was kind of directed towards Lawrence, but maybe you might have a good answer for us. Do we see the end of the foreclosure moratorium affecting inventory, and what does that have an effect on all our, different buyer demographics?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the Gulf states, I would say that there's a larger share of folks who are taking advantage of the foreclosure moratorium, who do also have equity in their home. So you could see that those individuals could sell their home moving forward. I will say, this is not the story from the Great Recession. This is not distressed sales coming into the market. These are people who do have equity, who could move into a more affordable property or could rent temporarily. So that could be a silver lining that we may see moving forward, is that they do have equity because home prices have been pushed up.
Awesome. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for your time. Everyone, her slides will be available after this. We get done with this chat. Again, thank you so much for coming in and giving us so much informative information. I know that for me, I learned way more than I thought I could even take it in 1 hour of time. So really appreciate it. Everyone else, thank you for listening to this session. Thanks to Lawrence and Jessica for the great information. Our next session will be Thursday at 9 a.m. with Laurel Grafe discussing a view from the Fed, insights on the national and middle Tennessee economy. It should be another great session, and I hope to see all of you guys there. Everyone have a great Tuesday. Bye-bye.